Welcome everyone. My name is Jatinder Kohli, and on behalf of the Centre for American Progress and the Hudson Institute, I'd like to welcome you today to this event. In a town where bipartisanship is perhaps somewhat rarer than it might be, this is evidence of bipartisanship. And it's an absolute pleasure to have the Minister here this afternoon to talk about experiences in the UK. Just to give a little bit of context, Nick Hurd is the Minister for Civil Society in the British government and is really going to talk about the experience of the UK in the space of social impact bonds. He's going to make a few remarks and then Bill's going to give him a bit of Bill's going to interview him for a few moments. It should be a relatively informal conversation and I'm sure it'll be very enjoyable. So just a couple of things to say. One is that, in their very concept, social impact bonds are evidence of bipartisanship. So this was an idea that in the UK emerged under a Labour government and has been embraced and taken forward to a different level by a Conservative government. When the current government came into power, there wasn't one on the books, but there was one in the pipeline. And I think you were saying earlier there are 13 on the books now and 8 more in the pipeline in the UK. So it's a real success story of an idea and how you take an idea and move it forward. And in the US, similar experiences. A year or two ago, we had none in the US. We now have one that's gone live in the United States and a number of others that are in the pipeline. So today's a real opportunity to learn from the United Kingdom, to get a sense of where the US is at, and hopefully we can avoid reinventing the wheel in the United States. So with that very, very brief introduction, I'm just going to pass over to the Minister. Thank you so much for your time, and I know you're a little bit jet lagged and the afternoon's the hardest time of day, so particular thanks.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Please bear with the jet lag. It's very nice. It's really pleased to be here. I'm told that anything that brings together the Hudson Institute and the Centre for American Progress must be politically interesting, and I think this is. And it's. I'll speak very briefly because this isn't just about social impact bonds. Social impact bonds are a tool in the box that we're keen to develop. We're keen to explore, as you are, but actually they're just part of a much bigger challenge and picture. And the challenge, how we frame it in the UK, but I suspect it's the same for you, is how do we do a better job of tackling our social problems in the UK? How do we meet our public's demand for better services when we have got much less public money? And we are having to contract public budgets in a very, very severe, sustained way, and particularly at the local level, where more and more power is being devolved. This is happening at a time when, as you well know, the demographics are such that many local government areas are concerned that most of their budgets are going to get sucked up into the care agenda, into adult social care. So this is the fundamental challenge. How do we meet our citizens' expectations at a time where we've got significantly reduced public money? And underlying all this is what we're trying to engineer in the UK is a completely different attitude to how public money gets allocated and spent, and the evidence base and the evaluation and the rigor underlying that process. I'm exaggerating, I'm not trying to make a political point, but over a long period of time, we developed a very unrigorous process of spending public money with shockingly low evidence base underpinning it, and tremendous built-in resistance to working with private sector, working with private capital to innovate and to do new things. And as a result, our system has developed into something that is fantastically risk-averse and very bad at looking at the cost and the risk associated with the status quo. So this is what we have to dismantle, challenge, break down, chisel away at to try and create the space for genuine social innovation, because we won't get to where we need to get to just by cutting budgets. We have to create the space to back the social entrepreneurs who can help us find better ways of doing things. And one of the tools, there are two really important tools. One is by sending a really powerful signal to the people spending our money commissioners, people commissioning services on our behalf, that we expect them to commission for outcomes, and we expect them to pay on results, pay for success, or pay by success, I think is your expression. Where that's appropriate. It's not appropriate in every situation. This is a big, big cultural change, and one that we are gradually introducing with, I think, some success. But alongside it, what we're also actively doing is developing a new market called social investment. This is money that is prepared to blend financial return with social impact. And it's real. It's small, it's embryonic, I don't want to overstate it, independently measured at about £200 million in the UK at the moment, but with sensible people thinking it could be worth about £1 billion in 2015. It's money we're really interested in, if it's genuinely socially motivated as well. And very briefly, we've made some quite big interventions to try and grow this market. The first was to set up what we think is the world's first social investment institution, an organisation called Big Society Capital. It has £600 million on its balance sheet. Hasn't cost the taxpayer a penny because we got the money from unclaimed dormant bank accounts, and we gently persuaded our 4 biggest banks to put up £200 million of risk capital. A new institution, £600 million to invest, to grow the social investment marketplace as a wholesaler, investing through intermediaries, setting a big challenge to the market saying, come to us with things to invest in. And this is important because actually our view, we may be wrong, is actually the biggest risk to the growth of this potentially really important market is not money. We think there's plenty of money around that would be motivated by this proposition of investing to make a positive difference to something you care about and getting your money back. We think the challenge is how to build the supply of credible investment propositions, the deal pipeline. So alongside this, we've invested relatively significant sums of taxpayers' money in building a pipeline of funds that are designed to support a social venture, a social program, a social enterprise from start-up effectively through to the point that they are ready to absorb serious amounts of social investment. And so where do social impact bonds very briefly sit in all this? There's something to invest in. But critically for us, they're a tool that creates the space for genuine social innovation. Why? Because, and they sound very grand, social impact bonds, they're a set of contracts that are designed to do the following. Let me give you one real life example from the UK. So one local authority, local government in the UK, big area called Essex, has a huge problem with children in care. Children that have to be taken away from their families and the state is effectively the parent. Well, the state is a lousy parent and this is really, really expensive. So Essex decided we must do something different. And through structuring a social impact bond, what they've managed to do is persuade social investment to come in, real investors with £3 million to fund an intervention, a new one, complements what they're doing, it's not substituting anything, that has a decent evidence base behind it. If it works means if the outcomes that are contracted are delivered, then Essex will pay 8%, 8 to 12% per annum, and will save a big multiple of that. If it doesn't work, Essex pay nothing. The investor is effectively taking, in this case, equity risk, which they're happy to do. They've priced it, and they are just as motivated by a child staying out of care as they are by earning 8%. This is really valuable money for us. And this, I hope the way I've described it, you can see why Essex would be attracted to that. It gives them a chance to try something new at very little risk to themselves that complements what they're doing already. Allows them to hopefully keep more children out of care and help them deliver a better service. Essex have led. Every single other local authority virtually in the country that has a problem with children in care is now looking at that very, very closely. So you can see how this could spread through a system that is really desperate to look at new ways of tackling some very big, stubborn social problems. It's a tool in the box. My final point is this. Like you, for some time we just had one, and a lot of hype around one, and we're uncomfortable about that. So what we've done, finally, through what we call an outcomes fund that looks and sounds a bit like the fund that's gone into your budget, is a fund designed to accelerate more social impact bonds across the country, because we need more. We need to test whether these things work. We need to test what investors really feel about them, what price they're prepared to charge for various levels of risk. So we now have 13. We can see another 8 coming down the track. Beyond then, we can see another 5 or 6. And so within a couple of years, we really hope to have at least 20 social impact bonds in the market across different sectors. And we'll then have a better view of whether, how important this could be. We have a sense it could be very important, which is why finally my boss, the British Prime Minister, has used our presidency of the G8 this year to put this whole issue of social investment on the agenda of the G8, because most developed economies face that same big challenge that I addressed at the start. How do we do better with less? Thank you.
Well, let me add my welcome, Minister, to Hudson Institute Center for American Progress joint project here, and my thanks to Kristen McIntyre, who's my assistant, for helping set this up. I mentioned to you before we sat down here that I would ask you this very general question, sort of a 50,000-foot question. The United States obviously doesn't have a Department of Civil Society, and yet this is something that people have talked about periodically. We need some sort of central federal authority that would be more involved in regulating civil society and promoting civil society, various versions of it. It's something that Britain obviously has that we don't have. Can you say a word about the role of the ministry in UK civil society and what that might mean for the United States?
So the Office for Civil Society sits in the Cabinet Office, which is right at the heart of government, the corporate headquarters of government. And that's important, because we have effectively 3 functions. One is a general advocacy for civil society across the system. The second is actually delivery of a program and a budget, something like £500 million sterling in the last spending round, which has really got two areas of focus. One is the work that we're doing to try and mobilize our human capital, to encourage more people to give, both time and money, encouraging more people to get involved in their communities. Because we have a situation where 30% of the country do 90% of the giving, and we want to expand that. So mobilizing our human capital. And the second part of the program is the work we're doing to try and help our civil society adapt to really quite profound change. Not just in the way government works, which is profound, but also in terms of society, in terms of new technology opportunities, new attitudes of the business sector towards working with charity. Huge amount of change for our civil society to manage. And it's a relationship that matters enormously to us, not least because part of this Prime Minister's vision is to try and rebalance power and responsibility in our country, where the state has been too powerful, and to try and build a better balance between a more open government, a more socially responsible private sector, and a stronger civil society. And it was felt that we needed a team at the heart of government to act as an advocate and driver of that process.
Great. The Jinder mentioned that this is this concept, social investment, has an ability to sort of bring together the ideological wings in the United States, and the joint Hudson Center for American Progress event is a piece of evidence in that proposition. Does it function the same way in British politics? I mean, is this something that, I mean, obviously if the ministry was established under a Labour government and is now continuing under a Conservative government, one might say, but is it an important piece of sort of reconciling the ideological tension in Britain, and thoughts about how that might function in the United States?
There's a lot of bipartisan support for it in terms of social investment. As was mentioned before, the process which led to how Big Society Capital, the first intervention, was made possible by a Labour government because they took through the legislation that allowed these dormant bank accounts to be used for social impact. Now, we were much more ambitious than they were in terms of how that money was used, but we wouldn't have been able to do it without that legislation. So, underpinning this is a strong bipartisan approach to the attractions of developing a social investment market, and that's important for investors. That's important for intermediaries that are structuring these things. Where there is a rub is around the appetite for genuinely opening up the public service markets to non-public sector deliverers, and we're very keen to do that, and particularly in that to try and make it easy for charities and social enterprises to help us deliver better public services. There's more obstruction on the left because of the influence of the unions.
Right. Yeah, because one of the comments you made, the shockingly low level of evidence for success in government programs, obviously, is an ideologically laden comment in the United States, and only
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Right, exactly. Of course, you did. But I'm glad the Center for American Progress has subscribed to this notion. We're making progress here, indeed. Talk for a minute about, and this is a really quite important barrier for this proposition in the United States, the notion of changing the status quo, the culture of the nonprofit sector and government contracting and so forth. Everyone has programs well in place for this sort of thing. Obviously, a lot of government programs in the United States are already delivered through nonprofits and so forth and so on, and people are perfectly content to sustain that process the way it is. You obviously faced that kind of problem in Britain. What can you say about changing the status quo? How does that? What was helpful for that, and how might we think about it here?
I think we've only just started, and I don't underestimate the size of the mountain we've got to climb, and we're definitely in the foothills, because over the years there's been allowed to accumulate a tremendous aversion to risk, and not enough rigor in actually assessing the risk that is already being taken with the status quo. And this needs to be challenged. And we're gradually setting about that by really sending a strong signal of permission for commissioners to try and do things in different ways, by sending strong signals that we want to encourage leadership in this space. And that's important because these people are operating in a very risk-averse environment, and they need to receive a strong signal that it's okay to challenge the status quo and think about doing things in a different way. We are fortunate, if I can use that expression, by the environment in which we're in, because frankly, business as usual is not an option across most of the system, and people are being forced, because of budgetary constraints, to think about doing things in different ways and open to doing it with different partners. And we've got to use that. We've got to use that. And in terms of the voluntary sector, the not-for-profit sector, again, big cultural change, because most of them are used to growing or being funded through a hand-to-mouth funding environment, through grants, through philanthropy. So the concept of taking on investment with the rigor underpinning the social investment process is new and challenging, which is why we've invested to try and support capacity in that context.
Excellent. One factor in Britain you mentioned that probably we're not going to be able to employ in the United States. You said there's a lot of decentralization going on in government, and could you just say a word about that and how important that might be in promoting this process?
Yeah, it's hugely important. It carries great risk, but also great opportunity. So the backdrop here is over. I'm not making a party political point because it's happened over governments of different colours. Central government amassed a huge amount of power. And we're now in the process of letting that go by devolving commissioning responsibilities, but also by transferring power in terms of new rights and opportunities at the community at the community level. And we just think that is, we think that is really important. And what we see, and I get the impression this is beginning to happen in the States as well, is that the localities, the communities are responding. We're seeing some really good examples of very creative thinking, very imaginative thinking, great entrepreneurial energy, and that's exactly what we need to harness and capture and support.
Yeah, so you're finding that local governments are in fact embracing this in some places. They're they're the drivers of this.
It's inevitably patchy, and there will be noise about what we call postcode lotteries in the UK. In reality is there've always been postcode lotteries, and if you're to progress, if you're to improve, if you're to embrace the challenge that I set out, you have to give people freedom to innovate. You have to give some permission to fail, because we know from our own lives it's normally when we screw up that we actually learn in something, and this is an environment in which we have to be much more permissive of failure and are much tougher on the status quo and encourage people to innovate. But in doing so, we need to make it easier for the innovators to access risk capital.
Do you face the charge that this is privatizing what should in fact be public services? We hear that in the United States, comments about that, relating to the social investment.
There's a big noise. I mean, it's been around for years, decades, but there's a big noise around contracting out public services to big private sector providers. There's less noise around involvement of the not-for-profit sector or mutuals, public sector mutuals, which is something we're very keen to encourage. So it's kind of graded. We don't really care, because actually what we're interested in is trying to create the conditions for innovation and better outcomes, and we think a diverse market supply is pretty fundamental to that.
Right. Very good. Well, let's go to the audience. We have about a half an hour, and we have a terrific audience, a lot of knowledgeable people. So let's, we do have a microphone, yes? Yeah.
Could you introduce yourselves?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please state your name and affiliation, if you could, please. Yeah, you have to speak directly into the microphone.
You may not need it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
what sorts of investors are becoming interested in these kinds of contracts?
Yeah. So the question was, what kind of investors are getting interested in these projects? It's a good question. So we have specialist investors. We have a small ecosystem of existing specialist investment organizations, a handful of sort of pioneers, which we're actively supporting. Big Society Capital, the organization £600 million organization I mentioned before, is a prominent investor in social impact bonds, as you'd expect. Another organization called Bridges Ventures is another specialist in this area. So you have some specialists. And then the other market, the money closest to market, I would say, are charities and foundation trusts, sitting in our country on about $80 billion of assets currently invested through conservative institutions investing in conservative financial instruments. And our argument to them is, look, this impact investing, the social investment space is entirely consistent with your mission. Why not think about using your balance sheet, putting your endowment to work, just at the margin, 2, 3, 4, 1%, whatever it is. If we could just achieve that, we'll move big money into the social sector. So that's the money closest to the market. Then you've got institutional money. That's complicated. I think their participation depends on the development of what we call sort of blended funds, which structured investment funds that allow different types of capital to participate with risk allocated in different ways between them, and you're more advanced than us in that respect. And then at the end, there's us, savers, investors. We've done some research in the UK that shows that high net worth individuals are very open to this proposition. And I think the general public would be as well. I look at it very simply. We have a sort of tax wrap savings product called an ISA, cash savings account. And if my bank came to me and said, look, here's a standard ISA earning you X%, and here's a social ISA that allows you to make a contribution to something you care about, opportunities for young people, and pays you X% minus a bit, I'd be open to that now. But I'm not being offered it, and I don't expect to be offered it within the next few months. But I know in the UK, at least 2 retail banking organizations are thinking of offering this product. It makes me think actually that the money's not the problem here. It's actually proving the concept that if you invest in these things, you will get your money back.
Could you say that getting your money back raises that interesting question about evidence versus innovation in this field? Obviously, investors want to see strong evidence of likely success, and yet there is a claim being made for this field that it will, in fact, encourage innovation. You know, thoughtful, cutting-edge, and unproven approaches to social problems. How do you balance that? What's your view of the?
Yeah, I think that's a journey. I think this will inevitably, this new social investment will tend to gravitate towards proven stuff that's proven because there's less risk attached to that. But that in itself will send a strong signal to the suppliers of interventions that they need to be more robust in developing an evidence base around what they do. But I think also that people will come in, and it may not be social investors, it may be venture philanthropists, it may be a different type of money that's actually say we're prepared to take it, we can take more risk, we're prepared to take more risk to help people climb the evidence curve. And so I think this market will become a bit blurred, a bit more sophisticated in terms of money coming in to do different things to help the social entrepreneurs, help the pioneers climb the evidence curve.
Good, great. More questions, please. Yes, gentleman right here in the middle of the row.
Thank you very much. In the UK, how is this money treated, or this investment treated? In the US, we have laws that apply to the private sector and those that apply in the public sector. And for example, in the private sector, it would be the Securities and Exchange Commission that would provide oversight. In the public sector, for example, if it was a grant or a government contract, things like veterans preference, prevailing wages, buy USA goods, open records, meetings, which set of laws, or how is this treated in a social impact bond kind of setting?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question, and I don't have a final answer to it because it's work in progress. Because part of what we've tried to take a very holistic look to how we as a government can help encourage the growth of this market, and part of that has been to look at the regulatory environment in which this operates. And our starting point is how can we make this regulatory environment as benign as possible. So we're making gradual incremental changes. So our financial service regulators, the FSA, having been quite agnostic or uninterested in this space, we've had conversations with them. They are now much more engaged with it, and there are discussions about the proportionality of the regulation around how these products are marketed, and that's an ongoing conversation that I don't think we've got quite to where we want to get to, but there's so much political will to drive this market that helps enormously. So work in progress, but our desire is to try and make the regulatory environment as proportionate and benign as possible, particularly in relation to the promotion of these products.
Yeah, Jackie, please.
Thank you. My name is Jackie Pfeffer Merrill, and I'm a staffer at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, but I'm a political scientist by training, and so I'm going to ask a political scientist question.
I don't know what that means. I'm braced.
I'd like to, I'm thinking about this as well as the Legacy 10 changes to the estate tax laws, and I'm wondering how your government conceived of the relationship between these proposals and perhaps others to increase the role of the public in addressing social problems, or private monies addressing social problems. Was this a cabinet level decision that you wanted to think about ways in which to accomplish this, and on that there was a list of things, that changes to the estate tax law, expanding this initiative that had begun under the Labour government, or were there programs that it bubbled up within each ministry, within your ministry, to say, we were going to expand this initiative that had started elsewhere, and then I'm not sure the name of the ministry responsible for taxation, but in that ministry there was a separate initiative. So is it government-wide, holistic approach, or was it department by department?
No, of course, it was a part of a brilliant grand design, executed with seamless joined-up government, which is characteristic of our administration. There is some truth in that. Our Prime Minister, and I know your President, has a very strong commitment to the idea of citizenship and promoting the idea of social responsibility, and my Prime Minister articulated that through a vision called the Big Society, which has had its knocks and its share of scorn and derision, but it's fundamentally about trying to encourage a greater sense of social responsibility, trying to encourage more people to get involved and to work together at a local level to do a better job of tackling some of the problems we've got. And there are two strands in this narrow space. There are two strands. One, what can we do to encourage more people to get involved in giving, both of time and money, with no expectation of getting the money back, but with everything we know in terms of the sense of fulfillment that comes with being part of a process of helping other people. And then there's this strand of social investment where the starting point is, I expect to make a social impact, but I expect to get my money back, preferably so that I can recycle it again. So they're different things. There'll be a bit of overlap at the sort of high net worth philanthropist level, but basically they're different. They're different activities, but you know, they were genuinely part of this big society vision of you know, what can we do as a government to create the conditions whereby more of our fellow citizens work together to help each other.
Good. More questions, please. Yes.
Hi there, David Thompson, National Council of Nonprofits. We do a great deal of work in the area of government nonprofit contracting reform. So evidence-based impact, great idea. Promoting innovation, not doing something wrong and then doing it all over again, breaking the cycle of insanity, great idea. The report here, the paper here from the Center for American Progress cites the Urban Institute study from 3 years ago about government contracts. We know a lot about that because we partnered with them on that project. The part reported is that there are a bunch of contracts of no evidence based. Not quite true, but close enough. What's left out is where we're involved, and this is my question on contracting. We've done a great deal of work and demonstrated that our contracting system is broken. Governments are horrendous partners with nonprofits in this country, underpaying, not paying on time, and critical for here, changing contract terms. Contracts tend to be one-sided. Bringing in an investor that has a special interest or personal interest in how it turns out adds another complexity to it all. How is this different? Does this take us out of the cycle, or is this adding more layers of complexity and risk to the nonprofits?
No, I mean, the environment you describe is one I recognise because it's kind of what we're living with in the UK historically as well. And I don't think we're going to solve it overnight, but we've got various tools at our disposal. One is what we're discussing, which are tools that create the space for doing things in different ways. But secondly, government can do a lot to build the capacity and capability of what we call commissioners, the people shaping and procuring the contracts, where we paid really shockingly low attention to the quality and status and support of these key individuals, because through their fingers flows billions of dollars of our money. So we have a process of training and support and networking that we think will upgrade that capability. That's the encouraging bit. The other bit is we're shoving a whole load of transparency into this area. So and that's going to be really awkward in some places, because we as citizens are going to have much more information about how our money is being spent, and with it the right to challenge challenge it. So there are various levers we're pulling. We've got a big test coming up now. We've got a big change of structure, how we do prisoner rehabilitation and probation in our country. Big payment by results, outsourcing process where the frame of it will be announced in a few days' time. And I'm really hopeful that through that we'll send a signal of what we've learnt on this journey in terms of how government should work with the non-for-profit sector and understand the issues that the not-for-profit sector has in terms of working with government. And there are various tests, and that's one I hope that we pass. But we're on a journey for sure.
Yeah, behind David's question, I think, and we've had a couple of panels at the Bradley Center over the past year, sort of discussing this. And one of the objections to this, the proposition, especially the social impact bond, has been that it sort of demands that all the pieces function sort of at optimum efficiency, right, at the same time, which is, of course, something that rarely happens. Government plays its role exactly as government should, and David's question suggests that indeed it does not play that role very often.
But this process is a driver of new rigor and discipline, and many will fail that test, but again, it's all about the signals that it sends about how things should be done.
Say a word about the transparency element of that. What does that mean in particular? I mean, what sorts of things are you putting?
Well, like your administration, because we work very closely together on something called the Open Government Partnership, we're very committed to transparency, down to giving citizens really granular information on how money is being spent in their name at a local level, down to the last £500 spent at local authority level. And we're not there yet, but we're heading that way, and you'll appreciate once you start on that journey there's no way back, because once you give people this information it's irreversible, and we're very comfortable with that. But what we hope, and we may be being a bit naive about this, is that will create the conditions whereby it's easier to challenge what government is doing. You will literally be able to look at a grant or a contract and be able to challenge it. And we set up an explicit right to challenge, to which a local commissioner has to respond. And we'll see what the response to that is. But we sticks and carrots.
Yeah, very good. Yes. More questions, please. Jatinder, don't you want to defend wasteful government spending? I mean, I'm going to keep hammering at this until I get a rise from you. I mean, come on. This is... guess not. Okay. Oh, here we go. All right. Yes.
Do I think there should be a tax break for social investment? Yes, I do, and I'm absolutely delighted that my Chancellor of the Exchequer agrees, because he announced in the last budget that we're now in the end stages of a process of a consultation with the market and our Treasury officials to structure a new incentive for social investment, which will sweeten, I hope, the blend of financial return and social return. And we've argued for some time that it's needed, and we got pushed back a while because that's the Treasury's job. But they've bought the argument, so we'll have something in place by this time next year.
Yeah, good. More questions? Okay. Well, Rick, you don't want to ask a question? Rick Cohen, representing the Nonprofit Quarterly.
I can always ask questions.
Excellent.
Well, first, let me make sure I understand the dimensions of this. You said the size of the pipeline is 8 social investment bond projects currently there.
There are 13 live.
13.
We can see another 8, and behind them maybe another 8. And so within 2 years, we hope to have at least 20.
Can you give us some sense of what the magnitude that is of the financial investment that's involved?
Size at the moment is sort of £5 million each.
So that's a pretty small piece.
It's tiny.
That's tiny.
Yeah, it's tiny.
So
I think I said at the start, we shouldn't get, this is a small subset of something a bit bigger.
So the question becomes, when you read the literature about social impact bonds in this country, people get very excited as though this is a wave of the future that's going to transform the way government and nonprofits operate. Yet you're talking about, in the UK, a very small piece. You're talking about in the US, a tiny piece, which is done by the Bloomberg administration in New York and an emerging program in Massachusetts, and the Pay for Success program of the Obama administration. Doesn't this small scale of this sort of militate against the ability to have the kind of large impact and changing culture that you're talking about?
No, you're entirely right about the scale of it, and I think I was quite frank at the start saying that social impact bonds is just a part of a bigger picture. It's got a huge amount to prove. I think you'll find certainly the system I'm part of is if there is proof that this works, that these interventions can be introduced at an acceptable rate of financing, then I think we will go big on it. We're piloting, we're testing now. So, but the point I was trying to labour is that underlying all this is a different attitude to how the public sector, the government commissions services, with a much bigger focus on payment by results, much greater demands in terms of evidence. So there's a big cultural change that sits behind all this, of which social impact bonds is just a manifestation. Well, the other point I may have not got across clearly enough is that social investment as a source of funding for the non-profit or the not-for-dividend sector in my country is much broader opportunity than just social impact bonds. We've got big charities thinking about issuing charity bonds. We have social enterprise funds being set up to offer a sort of investment proposition to try and scale up ambitious charities and social enterprises. So the social investment opportunity is much bigger than just social impact bonds. And social impact bonds, as you say, are a small subset of it at the moment, but attracting a lot of attention because if they work, they could be very big.
But what's striking about your presentation is that, if I understand it correctly, that some of what you're achieving is due to the fact that you're priming the pump in a way, that you are making investments to make innovation possible. So it requires a government outlay and a government commitment at that level. Moreover, with the fact that you have the big society, is it a big society bank? Making some portion of these investments, I think you identify them as among the largest, if not the largest investor in these bonds, that you have a government institution that is also part of this mix, so that you have a government outlay necessary to make private sector investment, in a sense, work. How has the government outlay made its way through the government process, given the fact that your government, like our government, is a bit short of cash sometimes, and has a number of competing issues out there that would say we can find other uses for the funds?
Good question. Just to clarify, Big Society, it's actually called Big Society Capital, but it is not a government institution. We set it up, but as I said, we didn't set it up with any taxpayers' money. We used what are called dormant bank accounts, and we persuaded the banks to put some risk capital up. We just happened to drive that process and make it happen, but taxpayers not paying a penny for that. So the amount of taxpayers' money being, you're quite right, we have a priming function. We are driving the development of this market. We are investing, but I would say, total amount of taxpayers' money being invested at the moment is around 60, 70 million pounds. It's relatively small money given how important this opportunity is for us. Much of what we're doing Doesn't really cost the taxpayer anything because it's about opening up public service markets to create the conditions whereby more charities and social enterprises can compete for contracts and go to market and say, we need finance to help us do this. It's about devolving powers so that community groups have more opportunities to take over assets, community assets, so come to market and say, we need some help financing this. This means looking at the whole regulatory environment, it means looking at the tax environment, pulling all the levers that government has got, as you say, to prime and to enable and to drive this forward. And yes, invest in a strategic way to try and to escalate. But it's not, we're not talking hundreds of millions of pounds here. It's a relatively small amount of money and a lot of noise.
I think a lot of I think a lot of American conservatives would listen to that and say we really don't want that, right? I mean, we don't want government involved to that degree in our private sector. That would go back to the example of the faith-based initiative in the George W. Bush administration, which tried to do a bit of that, obviously relating to faith-based and community initiatives. And now, of course, in retrospect, George W. Bush is a hideous, big spending conservative who violated every principle of American conservatism, among other things, by this kind of involvement with by government in encouraging civil society activity. What would you have to say to that? I mean, is that is that something that is British political culture so different that that isn't really you don't hear that objection?
Oh no, you're bound. Our politics isn't that different. You're bound. There's been no. I've never heard that expressed about what we're doing in relation to social investment yet. And we make no excuses of the fact there's a small embryonic market that needs developing, and so we are priming it, but we're doing it in a way where everything we're doing is about enablement. There are no, if you like. Well, let me contrast this style. The previous administration tried to do something different. And they set up a government fund, effectively, to which non-profit sectors could bid directly. It had a retail function. That wasn't building a market, that was distorting a market, because then everyone went to the government fund and everyone else trying to create some space here just evaporated. We said, no, we'll set up Big Society Bank not as a government institution, as an independent, transparent organisation, and we'll set it up as a wholesaler to operate behind the market, to encourage and enable the market. So it's a different philosophical approach. But this is all about trying to unlock the potential of socially motivated private capital to come in and work with us to help better responses to social problems. And they won't come in if they think that the government hand is too heavy.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. Yes. Jitendra, you're...
I'm going to let your agreement come through in a minute.
Oh, good. Excellent.
So if I was being...
Is this the end of bipartisan?
Yes, exactly.
No, not at all.
You were here, ladies and gentlemen.
We've destroyed
if I was being cynical about it, let's do some of the the maths here. The UK economy is about 10 times smaller than the US economy. So we have to take every number that we've just taken in the UK and multiply it by 10. Sterling's about 1.5, so 15. To get to a dollar equivalent number. So the UK government has, and I don't take this view, but I'm going to sort of put it out there. The UK government has forcibly taken £600 million from the banks, stuck it in a quasi-non-governmental organisation, which really is just an arm of the government, because it's not like the banks had any choice over where the money went. I say, having worked on that policy 10 years ago in the British Treasury. And in addition to that, there's £500 million, I think you said, going from the British Cabinet Office to bolster the social sector through a series of bunks. I don't take any of these views myself, but there is an argument. There's a lot of big government in action there. How would you defend that? So just to take those numbers, take the 500 million and the 500 million, double them. It's about $1 billion. That's about $15 billion now of equivalent money. That's a lot of money. And the White House talks about 300 million and probably won't get it.
Well, I'm glad
you happy now, Bill?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Taking your view for a moment.
Right.
Well, I'm really glad you don't believe any of that stuff. Because the first 500 is not government money, and we put some pressure on the banks to put up £200 million, but we argued it was in their interest. They were They were taking a caning in terms of public opinion on the banks, and it was the right thing for them to do. They could have said no, but they didn't. And the dormant bank accounts, we thought that was inventive and creative. It was a voluntary exercise. In theory, they could have said no. So we're proud of that. It's genuinely independent. I don't tell them what to do. All we said was it needs to be transparent and a wholesaler and independent of government, and it is, and it's genuinely seen to be. So the other 500, the budget that we do spend, a big chunk of that is on developing a program called National Citizen Service, which is all about trying to develop young people and encourage them to get more involved in their communities. That didn't exist before. I think that's quite legitimate for government to be investing in helping young people realize their potential and connect them with their communities. Very proud of that program. 93% customer satisfaction. 16-year-olds, tough crowd. They love it. So I have no apology for that at all. And the rest, well, we're in a situation, I don't know what the States is like, but we're in a process of transition in relation to civil society in relationship with government. We found ourselves in a situation where, for our civil society, the growth game in town for the last 10 years has been public sector income. And so this current situation is really tough for two reasons. One, suddenly organizations that arguably allowed themselves to become too dependent on the state are now facing a cut. But arguably, I'm generalizing, and this is a bit unfair, the whole system, or too much of the system, had lost a bit of vitality in terms of going out into communities and to donors and to philanthropists and businesses and energizing and creating the emotional connections with them, because the easiest game in town was just to go to your local authority and get that grant with no real rigor as to what that grant was being given for or what needed to be produced for it. And so the system became, I think, a little flabby and is now suffering some pain. And as I said, that's just cuts. If you think about what we're talking about, the change is the way in which government actually works to commission services and what that means for the not-for-profit sector. That's a huge amount of change to get your head around. Then you look at the technology opportunity and what is now possible and the power of digital media, social media to inform people, to inspire people, to move people, to mobilize people, and what this could mean for the not-for-profit sector. That's enormously exciting. Then you think about how I think the whole CSR space and how businesses, certainly in my country, are beginning to think in very different ways about their responsibilities and how they engage with the not-for-profit sector. That's a hell of a lot of change for a battered and bruised civil society to cope with. And therefore, we took a conscious decision at a time of when there's very little money that we would invest some money in programs to try and build capacity, resilience, leadership, skills, and frankly, just to help a few organizations through the storm. And that's a decision we took, and we're happy to be accountable for. In the scheme of things, it's not huge money for a sector that is fantastically important for us.
Excellent. That sounds like a concluding statement to me. Let's, yes, indeed. Let's thank the Minister for a terrific conversation. Thank you. That was terrific. Very good. You're dismissed.